Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show.
Welcome to one of the internet's best podcasts, where we dive deep into the lives of the extraordinary and fascinating people who leave an indelible mark on our world. Join us as we explore their captivating stories, remarkable achievements, and unique perspectives that shape history and inspire generations. Get ready to embark on a journey through the lives of inspiring people unlike any other.
Hello, folks, and welcome to the show. My name is Avrum Rosensweig, and I am just delighted to have you here to make you part of what we are trying to accomplish here, which really is to look at the world in a most positive way. I think if we can sort of set aside all those clouds and bumps along the road that humankind has experienced this time in history, we can see the absolute beauty and the tremendous creativity that makes this world go around. And I, for one, when I meet so many people in the course of my day whom are just so lovely and just so successful at what they do and have done so much to bring to others. This morning, I was officiating at a bar mitzvah. And the way I do that is by bringing the crowd into the service itself. And I would ask people who they are and how they're related and why they're there. And I was just so taken by the love in the room, and the relationship with the bar mitzvah, the kid and the family. And I walked away from there feeling really, really great. And I want to do more of that within our world. So what I do is I bring on individuals who are inspiring in nature, who have done really well for themselves in life and have a story to tell about it. And to this end, I have with me today, I'm going to say my very dear friend whom I met 5 minutes ago, Tom Lisanti. How are you, Tom?
Fine, thanks. How are you?
I'm really, really good. I want to make sure that I pronounce your name right. How do you pronounce your last name?
It's actually Lisanti.
Lisanti.
Yeah.
And what's the background of your name? Where are you from originally?
Oh, well, my father's family is from the Naples area of Italy, and my mother's family was from Sicily. So growing up as a kid, we used to say we're all Italian, 100% Italian. And my father said, no, you're 50% Italian, 50% Sicilian. So, and then I grew up on Long Island in New York, in Nassau County, the South Shore.
I want to do your intro in a moment, but before I do, do you feel Italian or do you feel Sicilian, or do you just feel like you're a New Yorker?
No, I really. When my grandparents were alive, I felt a little more Italian, but when my grandmother, my aunts, my great aunts died, and my great grandmother, the rest of us, like from my mother down, that generation, it's just all American. We they do the Italian, Christmas Eve with the, with the fishes and stuff.
Yeah.
But other than that, I feel American. I don't have any ties to Italy, really.
To me, I was telling you before, like, if you're from New York, and quite frankly, if you're Italian, to me, you're a Jew,
Yeah, in Hollywood, they would always, Jewish guys were playing Italians were playing Jewish people. It was constant,
Yeah, exactly. That's just the way it is. And, that whenever I hear about someone from New York, regardless if they're Catholic or not, they're a Jew. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Tom is an award-winning author of 11 books about film and television. His books include Carol Lynley, her film and TV career in thriller, fantasy, and suspense, Talking 60s Drive-In Movies, and Hollywood surf and beach movies. I think what's really fascinating about this is that not only are you an author, but you also appeared on Turner Classic Movies, co-hosting with Ben Mankiewicz, a week of 1960s spring break beach movies, and featured in the documentary The Green Girl about actress Susan Oliver, in an upcoming documentary about novelist screenwriter Terry Southern. So you've been writing for many years. When did you start writing?
I had an interest in it when I was in college during the early 80s, but my dad was like, you need to pay the bills. So he kind of pushed me into accounting/business. And so I left the writing drift, and it came back in the early 90s. I was working at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts as their finance manager. But I had this, great interest in film, and they were doing an exhibition, 100 Years of Horror Movies. It was called Screams on Screen, 100 Years of Horror Movies. And they needed volunteers to help the curator. And I volunteered, and I started, gathering information for the exhibition and writing some of the captions. And I was a big Carol Lynley fan because I saw her in the Poseidon Adventure going to the drive-in with my family. I just, something about her just clicked. And she did a lot of horror and thriller, so I got her into the exhibition. And my friend Lewis Paul, who co-wrote one of the books I did, with co-wrote Film Fatales, he said, "I have a fanzine. Why don't you write an article about Carol Lynley for it?" So I did. And his wife at the time, Heidi, said, "This is really good. You should send it to her and see if she'd give you an interview." I did. And back in the days of the answering machine, I came home and the little red dot was on, and I clicked it, and she says, "Hi, Tom, this is Carol Lynley. I just got your book about me." She goes, "Yes, I'll give you an interview." And so I interviewed her, and that was the first magazine article for Film Facts magazine. And then I used her as a calling card. I interviewed Shelley Fabre, Pamela Tiffin, Diane McMahon. And then someone said, "Why don't you do a book? Because you're interviewing all these actresses that, from the 60s and 70s that, nobody really talks about." So I put it together for a book. And then one book led to another book, led to another book. So, yeah. So basically, I thank the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts for spurring my writing career. And I had a great boss at the time. His name was Robin Marks. I reported to him, and he knew what I was doing. And he said, "Tom," he goes, "as long as you do your job, you could go do your research in the stacks, on work time. I don't care. You do a great job." And he goes, "I want you to balance both." So he was very supportive too. So that's what started the whole thing.
You have a really good job, don't you? I mean, you can spend a lot of time reading, a lot of time collecting research, then sitting and writing, which you're clearly passionate about. Like, it's a great job.
Yes, that job was from 1991 to 2000 when I worked there. And yes, it was great. And then I stayed with the New York Public Library, but I went I moved to the main library doing photo rights and permissions. So that cut off the research. And but to be honest, I used to do research, the databases from my computer at my desk. But I lost the access to going into the stacks at the Performing Arts Library and pulling clipping files and stuff. So that was a big difference.
Do you still go to libraries?
Well, actually, I retired from the library in 2022, but I volunteer at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts. I go in probably once a week. I try to go in once a week. I work with Jeremy McGraw. He's their photo library specialist. Yeah. And the library digitized thousands and thousands of photos from Broadway shows. And in the trying to get them up quick, they would just put the title of the show and they wouldn't identify the actors and actresses. So there's a backlog. So I go in there once a week and I go through, I take show by show, and, I with everything that's online, and I add the metadata, the names of the actors and actresses, if I could identify them. So that's what I've been doing for the last year and a half with them and stuff. So
why do you do that on a volunteer basis?
Well, because in rights and permissions, I used to license those photographs. So, and I used to do some of the metadata in my job, and I think the people deserve to be identified. I think Jill Howarth in Cabaret, she doesn't just say Cabaret. So, and it helps the library and it helps the public, because now a lot of people just search on people's names. So if you searched on Jill Howarth, although the library photographs are not going to come up just with cabarets, but if you have Jill Howarth in the stage production Cabaret, if somebody searches on Jill Howarth, she'll come up. And so it expands access and it helps the library bring in, new patrons and stuff from around the world, because everything is digital. All that stuff is digital on that website. So it reaches a lot of people.
So is it safe to say that you're very passionate about the people whom you write about?
Yes, because I always write about the underdogs. I don't write about Elizabeth Taylor. I don't write about Clark Gable. I don't write about Doris Day or whatever. I write about the people from the 60s and 70s who didn't make it to the top. But from all my interviews, a lot of them had some really interesting stories. They worked with some big stars, and a lot of them, sometimes it was bad luck, lack of determination, but they all had stories to tell. And so I've always liked the underdog. I was never like, my favorite actresses are Carol Lynley, Pamela Tiffin, Yvette Mimieux, Sue Lyon, Tina Louise. My favorite, Doris Day, Katharine Hepburn, they mean nothing to me. I always liked the ones that didn't become stars.
Well, why do you think that is, Tom?
I think it is. One is because I'm gay and I was in the closet. I felt like an underdog for years. I was in the closet for a number of years, and I kind of identified with these people because they weren't they weren't like the out there ones, and they were and they had like they were more cultish, and I think that's why I kind of gravitated to them. And also as a kid in the 60s and into the 70s, these are the actresses I would see on TV in my TV shows, Batman, Love American Style. These actresses would pop up, and I was like, oh, I like that. Tina Louise and Julie Newmar were my favorite actresses for a long time. Deanna Lund from Land of the Giants. I interviewed Deanna Lund. That was like a highlight for me because I loved Land of the Giants when I was a little kid. So,
did you meet Tina Louise?
No, I never got into interviews with Tina Louise. She turned me down twice.
Why would she turn you down? She was looking for a profile, wasn't she?
Well, Tina Louise, I wanted to interview her for that book I did with Louis Paul about the Spy Girls, and she wrote me actually, I'd rather be turned down than be ignored. And she wrote me a nice little note saying that thank you for your interest, but I really don't have much to say about. It was about the Wrecking Crew and Armored Command, and she goes, "I wish you well with your project." So I'd rather have somebody just tell me no than just ignore me. And then you wonder, like, did they get the email? Did they get my letter? Do I follow up? But if you just say no, and I've gotten a lot of polite no's, and I appreciate that.
I just interviewed Steve Stolaire. Do you know Steve? He's a writer.
I know the name.
Yeah, Steve's a writer. He most recently, a little while back, but he's still pushing it very well, wrote a book called Raised Eyebrows about Groucho Marx.
Oh, that's probably why I heard of him.
Yeah, and he actually at 19 years old went and lived with Groucho for about 3 years, helping him out, going through his fan mail and actually sort of archiving much of the material and mementos, etc., that Groucho had. He was just awestruck by Groucho, and the idea that he had a chance to go and work in Groucho's house. He said he worked 6 days a week. He found himself at home on the 7th. And he's sitting there thinking, why am I doing this? I could be with Groucho Marx right now. He was just so incredibly devoted to the man, to his expertise, to his gift. And he wanted to take that in as much as possible. Is that at all your relationship with your affection for stars?
Yeah. My most starstruck moment was I interviewed in person Linda Harrison, who played Nova on Planet of the Apes.
Yes.
And I loved the Planet of the Apes movies. And she was the ex-wife of Richard Zanuck, who was the head of 20th Century Fox. And so he was living, I went out there to do it in person. I interviewed, at the beginning, I used to go to LA a lot to do these interviews in person. And I drove up to his place up in, I think it was in Bel Air or somewhere. And she was staying in the guest house. So I drove up there and then met her. We got into her Range Rover and we went to lunch. And I interviewed her over lunch. And then she said to me, I do have 2 errands to do. Do you mind coming with me? And I said, no. She goes, I'm looking at a house that my son might be interested in buying, and I have to do some cosmetic shopping. So first we stop at this cosmetic store, and I'm standing there, and she's looking. And I'm like thinking to myself, oh my God, I'm cosmetic shopping with Nova from Planet of the Apes.
Yes, exactly.
And then I went with her to look at this house, and she's asking me what I think of it. I'm like, it was a huge house. I'm like, and I was like, oh my God. And I was like, wow. I'm like, yeah, it's nice. I live here. So that was my most starstruck moment, was like, because again, I was a big fan of hers, and I was like cosmetic shopping in Rodeo Drive with Linda Harrison.
How would you best define being starstruck? Because I get starstruck as well. I mean, I get starstruck by people like you because of what you've accomplished in your life and the books that you've written, the people that you've met. And I do because I'm really, truly fascinated by the level of success. You're an award-winning writer. I've watched a bunch of your interviews, and you're really out there. I just am really impressed, and I want to emulate what you have accomplished because as I and many people, I guess, at 64 years old, I'm really pushing hard to make this podcast something really, really special. So I quite am taken by successful people's level of success and want to go there. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, I mean, I first of all, I'm very flattered at what you said. But I feel about the same thing you feel about other writers too, that, that do write books about film and stuff, and their accomplishments. First, I have to say, now I realize why you called me Lisanti. I screwed up, and I must have did that with my laptop.
That's okay. It's better than I did,
Yeah, that's why it's Lisanti. I hit an O instead of an I, but sorry about that. But anyway, yeah. I have friends that write books and stuff too, and after I retired, I thought I was just going to sit around and watch DVDs, but I keep churning them out. And actually, I started to do books about soap operas because I was a big soap opera fan in the 80s. And I just love reaching out to people and, and talking to them about, again, like my book on a soap opera wasn't about All My Children and The Young and the Restless in General Hospital. It was about Ryan's Hope, a small, it lasted 13 years. It was critically acclaimed, but it was never a huge ratings hit. I always want to expose the people that didn't hit the top, but were successful. And, and these things I think should be remembered. So some people call me like an historian. I don't go that far because I didn't really study film or anything in college. But I do like doing the in the interview stuff. That's probably my researching about the shows, and then the actual interviews are probably my two favorite parts of it. My least favorite part is transcribing interviews. It takes a long time. And then especially it's great when people talk, when they go off on tantrums, they go off to the left, and you have to, when you're transcribing it, you're like, all right, I have to pull that out and find out when, and then, so that's the most difficult part for me. But yeah, I mean, I do like tracking these people down, and a lot of people are very, Pamela Tiffin, who I thought was a big movie star in the 60s, said to me, she goes, why do you want to interview me? This is in 1998 too. Why do you want to interview me? Nobody's going to remember me. I'm like, yes, they remember you. You're Pamela Tiffin. You're in 1, 2, 3 and Harper. And of course people remember you.
Yeah. And do they walk away like complimenting you on just being there with them, listening to them, asking them questions? You obviously make them feel great, right?
Yes, I think a lot of them are surprised, like how much I know about their careers. I mean, things that, I bring up things that they kind of forget about. And also on the flip side is like a Diane McBain said to me, she goes, when you're working back in the 60s, you do a show. She goes like, Batman. She goes, it was a week and then you go on to the next project. You kind of forget about it. And you don't realize when you're doing it, like 30 years later, people are still going to be talking about Batman. And so, so bringing the things up to them, and they could, talk about, their successes, and, I get them to talk about also things they turned down or parts they wanted they didn't get, things of that nature. And some of the actresses with the Me Too movement now talked about the casting couch and, handsy producers and directors here and there. But for the most part, a lot of them knew how to handle that. I didn't get any real horror stories from anybody.
It's a tenuous business, isn't it? It's almost as if I read this script, for whatever reason, I really like it, and I decide I want to take on that project, and it's just a flop. Or I was given this script, and I said, you know what, that's not for me. And another great actress comes along, takes it, and the thing goes to the moon.
Right.
I've always thought almost like, what a dangerous industry that way.
Yeah, and a lot of it is talent, but a lot of it is luck and timing. Like, for instance, Carol Lynley, who, when I became a fan of hers in the 70s, and then when Dallas came on and Dynasty Nuts Landing, I was like, why isn't Carol Lynley she's perfect age. She's still, turns out Carol was offered the role of Aline in the first when it was the character was introduced on Dallas in 1979. But Carol was involved with David Frost, and they had I think it was a vacation planned or something, like a long in the Far East. I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks. It coincided with the filming of Dallas because it was done on location. She had to go on location to Texas, and she told me that she thought it was just another guest shot. And at that time, Dallas wasn't Dallas because it was before it hit, and she turned it down. And then Joan Van Ark got the part. And Joan Van Ark got to play Valine for like 14 years. And again, it was just timing. And it's just not Carol. A lot of actors and actresses have those horror stories. I know Michael Dante told me he was supposed to be Steve McQueen's, one of the cops working with Steve McQueen in Bullet. And he knew Steve McQueen. He was a baseball player, Michael Dante. And he coached Steve McQueen's son. And he said they went to the first round table to read the script. And Michael Dante said, I made my big mistake. He goes, I stood up before Steve McQueen. And when Steve McQueen stood up, he said to me, I didn't know you were that tall. And then he said that afternoon, he was gone.
Really?
Yes, he was replaced.
What does that do to them, Tom? Does it eat them up inside or what?
It would eat me up, and I think maybe at the time
it would eat me up too.
Yeah, I think they were all over it. I mean, these are stuff in the past. So, and when you look back, it's all hindsight. So, he said to me, he goes, because that was my big mistake. I should have just let him get up and walk away before I stood up. But yeah, there's a lot of stories I've heard from various actors and actresses over the years, things, roles they didn't get because of something stupid. Or they passed on and not realizing. Deanna Lund, for instance, Irwin Allen signed her for Land of the Giants, and they kept postponing the production date. So she auditioned for Rosemary's Baby. Rosemary has a friend that she meets in the laundry room, and she got the part right there. Roman Polanski offered her the role. She went to Irwin Allen and told him, and he said, no. He goes, you're not going to do it. It's going to coincide with the start of Land of the Giants. And she had 2 kids. She didn't want to lose a lead role in a TV series. So she kind of went back to Roman Polanski and had to turn him down. He was livid. He goes, I've never offered an actress a part on the spot like I did with you. And he goes, I promise Irwin that you'll be done filming, so you'll be able to do Land of the Giants. Irwin didn't believe him. Irwin didn't know anything about Roman Polanski at the time, so she turned it down, and she regretted that. That was dumb. She goes, I could have been in Rosemary's Baby. I could have been the friend. And actually, Victoria Vetri, who was actually Angela Dorian at the time, took the part.
My father was a rabbi. And he was a conservative man, small c conservative, used to wear blue pinstripe suits. And his approach to life was very, very old school, if you will. Wonderful man, great activist, much beloved by his congregation. And in the afternoons when he had a couple of hours off, he would take a nap. And then he would watch, I think, The Edge of Night with my mother.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It was on at 4:00. Yeah, in New York.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I always wondered to myself, succinctly put, Tom, are those shows like Ryan's Hope, are they important?
Yeah, Ryan's Hope was sort of groundbreaking because it started in 1975, and most of the families on those shows were WASPs. They had, they were all white Protestants. They didn't really go into religion too much. One Life to Live did a little bit. They did have a Jewish family, the Siegels. But Ryan's Hope took its main family were Irish immigrants. Maeve and Johnny Ryan were Irish immigrants who came to America and opened a bar. And then they had children. So they were, and Maeve and Johnny were strict Catholics. So the Catholicism was really big in the first 5 years of Ryan's Hope. And then so you have these old world values versus the more modern values of their children in terms of divorce, premarital sex, abortion. So a lot of that all came into play during especially the show's first 5 years. So that, and the other thing that was interesting about Ryan's Hope was all the women had jobs. Maeve owned the bar and she worked the bar. There were Gillian Coleridge was a lawyer. Faith Coleridge was a doctor. There were journalists. The only quote non-homemaker was the show's antagonist, Delia Reed Ryan, but she was just such a mess. So there was, and that was different too, because there was no sitting around, women who didn't work, talking about other people. Now, so it showed, and for young women at the time, to show these independent women, Jill, Faith, Mary Ryan, who was a journalist, was pretty much groundbreaking. And why younger, it was always a younger skewing show, and why young women especially really got on into Ryan's Hope. But what happened with Ryan's Hope is what happens with all the soaps. When the 80s started, it was all glitz and glamour and Dynasty and Dallas, and Ryan's Hope, all of a sudden, the focus of the show is glamorous New York City. Delia, who is this, waif trying to be a and now owned this fabulous Crystal Palace, that restaurant that was really Tavern on the Green. And it was all champagne bottles, corks popping from champagne bottles. They run in a mafia storyline because, with the youngest daughter, Siobhan, involved with Joe Novak, was a mobster. His uncle was the capo. So it started to get more along those lines. And that's when I started to watch it, actually, in 1980, when it started to turn into something different, which I happen to like.
Well, what did you like about the different approach?
Well, so I didn't see the first 5 years. So I came in 1980. So what drew me into it was because I was a big fan of the Godfather movies, and I stumbled on Ryan's Hope by accident I was going to Nassau Community College, and I had early classes and late classes. And in between, I lived close enough to come home for lunch. And I was just flipping through the channels, and I saw this pretty blonde. She looked like Carol Lynley, and she's friending to this guy about, she's not going to, she thinks the mob is going to steal her restaurant because the Don died, and she's not sure whose name the restaurant is in. And I'm like, this is a Godfather type of thing. And I was like, what? I didn't know what I was watching until the credits rolled. And I was like, Ryan's Hope, that's a soap opera. So that's what really drew me in, was the whole Godfather type plot that lasted for a number of years in Ryan's Hope. And that's one of my favorite years. Again, a lot of people, so those women that started watching in 75, a lot of them started to tune out in 1980 because their show had totally changed. And actually, it really changed because of General Hospital, when the whole Luke and Laura, and they started to bring in adventure storylines and the Ice Princess and stuff. So ABC would say, well, if it's working on General Hospital, it should work on All My Children, One Life to Live, Ryan's Hope, and The Edge of Night. So they would force those shows to emulate General Hospital. And even though Ryan's Hope was totally not General Hospital.
I mean, I have to profess, there was a time in my life, too, where I would watch those shows. And what I remember is I couldn't wait, like you said, to come home, during lunch or what have you, and see what was going to happen to the main character or the secondary character. And I remember distinctly, because it was on every single day, almost as if I became friends.
Oh, yeah.
With the kid, right? Is that right? Yeah.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I was like drawn to Delia. Again, I guess this is the gay boy in me, because she was like the bedraggled. She always felt like she was the underdog. She didn't have the education like her Frank Ryan, her antagonistic ex-husband was a lawyer. His mistress Jill was a lawyer. Faith Coleridge was a doctor. Mary was a journalist. So she felt being an underdog. She had to resort to underhanded tactics. And what the surprising thing was, the creators, Paul Mayer and Claire Labine, I interviewed Paul's two daughters, were shocked that Delia became so popular, because they thought the fans would be 100% rooting for Frank and Jill to get together, even though Delia was the grasping wife. But Eileen Kristen played Delia. She wrote the foreword to my book. She was brilliant, and because she brought such empathy to the role, and she would cry and you'd feel sorry for her, half the audience shifted to her. Which surprised the creators, because they thought they were writing a down and dirty villain, and they didn't.
I mean, was there any part of you that actually was drawn to the dastardly character?
On Ryan's Hope, my favorites. When I was watching Ryan's Hope, I thought the characters in Shades of Grey, Delia, Joe Novak, the mobster who was in love with Siobhan Ryan, and he was torn between his mobster family and the good Ryans. Ray Woodard, played by Louise Schaefer, who was this power media mogul. Roger Coleridge, who was the dastardly brother of Jill and Faith. Those are the characters I liked, because they were written. And you give credit to Claire and Paul. They were written Shades of Grey. They did rotten things, but they had good in their minds. They had motives, and they were able to articulate why they were doing it. And you'd be like, yeah, I kind of see why they're doing it. For me, the villains were like Mary Ryan and Frank Ryan and Jill, the ones you were supposed to like. They were antagonists. They were not really antagonists. They were hypocrites. They were. They was just like they had haughty attitudes, and they never admitted to that what they were doing was wrong. It was always somebody else. So for me, those are the characters that were the villains, which technically they really weren't, but for me, they were.
What were there any gay characters in
No, and I write that in my book. For New York, for a show set in New York City, especially during the '80s when the AIDS crisis started, I interviewed one of the head writers, Millie Taggart, and she said at one point amongst the writers, they discussed bringing in a gay character because of all the soaps at the time, they could have gotten away with it. They were set in New York City. The Ryan's Bar was across the street from a hospital. That was the whole original setup, which is supposed to be Columbia Presbyterian, and they could have somehow done that. But she told me that ABC would have hit the roof. They knew it wasn't even worth trying to develop anything. She goes, they would have nixed it in a heartbeat. They wanted, it was 1984, 1985. They didn't want anything that like AIDS at that time. They wanted all fluff and, glitz and stuff. They didn't want to see anything like that. But if the show went past 1989, I hope they would have introduced a gay character because again, it's set in New York City. And if anyone should have a gay best friend, it was Delia. I mean, that was if any of those characters would have somebody, it would have been her. But it never got. They never did.
It's really interesting from a sociological point of view to look at the history of gay people, lesbians in film and in TV, and to also hear the narrative of those days and what carried forward. I sense, and tell me if you concur with this or not, when they started introducing gay characters into films and shows, and Ellen came out and such things, I found that it was a real big help, a huge help to the gay community, to that gay individual at home who was suffering quietly.
Oh, well, for me, the first one was Stephen Carrington on Dynasty.
Right.
I mean, and he was a all-American, blonde hair. He was very sensitive, and that was my first oh my God, I so identified with him. But then they turned around and made him bisexual because they got scared of having I guess a full-time gay character. They wanted somebody part-time who would go back and forth. And then just recently, I rediscovered. People probably forget about. There was a show called Brothers from Showtime that started in 1985, where Paul Regina played the youngest of two brothers, Brandon Maggart and Robert Walden, and he comes out as gay on his wedding day. Yes. And the show was about the brothers dealing with the younger brother being gay. And that was another one for me that I identified with because it wasn't because he was another, all-American type guy. He wasn't, what the media at the time would show you, these gay pride parades with all these flamboyant people and stuff. And it was just, and so I identified with those two shows. And though I didn't come out at the time, but it helped me internalize it at the time because there were people sort of because I was sort of like both those characters. I was shy and, quiet and stuff. And I kind of identified with them. And it did help a little bit.
Were your parents cool with you coming out?
Well, my father probably knew, but he died before I came out. And then, but I came out so late I was almost 30. Well, I was 30. But Yeah, I think everybody knew. I don't think I surprised anyone.
It was hard. When I came out as a non-religious Jew, my
Oh,
father was a rabbi, hence my mother was a Rebbitzin, and we're talking Orthodox, Tom.
oh, right.
And when I came out, not being Orthodox, I suffered tremendously because I was alienated. A lot of people actually were very aggressive toward me. How could you do this to me? That sort of thing, right?
Oh.
And it was really, really difficult. So, what was it similar for you, or was it more?
No, that was the sad part was when I finally did, like my sisters all figured it out. Everybody figured it out.
Yeah,
And it
yeah,
was sort of like, and it made me think like, oh shit, I should have done this earlier. I don't know
swear it's
why.
good. It's fun.
Yeah. I don't know why I waited so long. And so, but yeah, I mean, it was, yeah, there was nothing traumatic and everything. I told everyone shook their head like, oh, about time. and everyone
Right.
went,
I was talking to somebody the other day about going through something like that and coming out in a particular way, and they said, yeah, it was really easy. I go, yeah, I hear that, but the stuff leading up to it, the
yes.
nerves, the worry, what are they going to say? Will they still love me? That's the difficult part of the transition,
Right.
right?
And, and I grew up on Long Island amongst middle class people. Our neighborhood was Italian, Irish, and Jewish, and Long Islanders tend to be a little more conservative. And I grew up hearing all those derogatory things about gay people and
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
and that also kind of like kept me hidden away because of the time. It was really the time. I mean, to this day, I wish the internet was around back then. I think if there was an internet in there, I probably would have come out much earlier.
I mentioned to you prior to going to air that when I was a little fella, I don't know, maybe 5 years old, and you might be able to tell me the year this movie came out. My parents took me to In the Heat of the Night, a drive-in. Now, I think what they did was they had me sit in the back seat and fall asleep. I think that's it. But it's not like, honey, we're going to take you this amazing movie. But I do remember it. And I tell you, Tom, I was so mesmerized by being in the car and watching this enormous screen, right? And the things that were happening on it. You have a particular affinity for drive-ins, don't you?
Yes, that was the connection with my dad, which I didn't realize at the time. He took us all the time to the drive-in, and he didn't want, like, he wasn't going to waste his time taking us to see Walt Disney movies. He told us to, whatever we wanted. So, like I said, we went to see the Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns, the Planet of the Apes movies. I remember we went to see a movie called The Night They Raided Minsky's. It was about the first striptease and Britt Eklund, and I was sitting in the front seat between my mom and my dad. We had one of those big, long station wagons. And I guess that one must have kept my interest because I would fall asleep too. Painting a wagon, I was out in seconds. That sucked, that movie. But anyway, so it comes to the end and she's doing the striptease and her top falls off. And just as her top goes off, my father's hand went like this, and my mother's hand went like
that. Yeah, don't look. Yeah. What kind of station wagon was it? Do you remember what it looked like? Was it one of those paneled ones?
No, it wasn't paneled. It was green. I think it was green or blue, but it was the long one with the fins at the, it's with in the seat in the back looked the other way. I couldn't sit in the back seat looking the opposite way. I would get dizzy. But he would, for the drive-in, he would put the seat down. So like at that time, like in the late 60s, I was like 8, my brother was 6.5, and my sister was 4. So they would, if we fell asleep, we fell asleep. And, most part though, I stayed up. I mean, I watched, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, The Boatniks. They took it to see Patton with a lot of it was a lot of cursing. My mother would just come along, and I remember the one time she wanted to see Love Story, and we all piled in, and it was the Westbury Drive-In. Father came off the Parkway, and it was a long, long line. And he's like, "Oh, we're not going. I'm not going to wait on this long line." And my mother's like, "I've sat through 8 movies, westerns, this, that, and you're getting on that line. I want to see."
Damn Love it, Story. We're going to that movie. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So we saw Love Story.
What
I
did you
remember Love Story in Patton because of the language. It was the first time I saw movies where it was a lot of cursing.
would you ever watch a love story or the love story? Would you ever watch it again now? And what is it good now? Such a movie?
I actually saw it recently. It wasn't bad. I kind of liked it, I think. Yeah. I mean, I'm not a fan of Ali McGraw, but she was fine. And
You're not a fan of Ally McGraw, eh?
no, I just nothing appealing about her. And then when she was on Dynasty, I was like, ugh. Yeah, I have my favorites, and I have a lot of people I don't like.
Yes, yes. But tell me a little bit about the drive-in culture. Um,
Oh, I
on-
used to love going to the drive-in. Sometimes I would take myself out of the movie and I would just look out the window. It was like in a beautiful, warm night, and I would look at the sky and look at the other cars, and you know, they had the speaker in the window, you know, and
yeah, sitting on the glass. Yes.
right. And it was just such a, for me, it was such a comforting feeling. I mean, I just loved being at the drive-in, no matter what the movie was. And it was just so serene and calm. Like when people were like, everything's quiet and everyone was just watching, and you just hear the sound from the speakers echoing, you know, through the other cars and stuff. And yeah, we rarely ever stayed for the second feature. And sometimes it'd be like surf doc. For some reason, I was like surfing and beach movies, and I would like beg my father, "Can we just stay and watch it?" He's like, "No, it was late. It'd be like 11 o'clock."
What about the food in drive-ins? Any recollections of the food?
Yeah, we would actually buy snack. You know, I think
Hot dogs?
I was not a popcorn fan, so I don't remember the popcorn. I wouldn't eat popcorn, so I think I might have had like Cracker Jacks. I think maybe I used to have Cracker Jacks and a Coke. I remember a Coke. Me getting a Coke.
But you don't like popcorn?
I'm not a big fan of popcorn when I'm watching movies because it makes too much noise, and you know. Like,
Oh, is that what it is?
is?
You should be in synagogue in Yom Kippur when the old men are opening up these candies wrapped in cellophane. That makes noise.
Yeah, I can imagine.
What really compels me about, or one of the things that compels me about your work, excuse me, about your resume, is that you were on Turner Classics.
Yes, you know, it's an interesting story because my book, Hollywood Surf and Beach Movies, The First Wave, came out in 2006 or 7.
Yeah.
And I got an email from this guy saying, "Hi, Tom, I'm the webmaster for Turner Classic Movies. We're trying to, you know, do a section on books. You think we could get a copy of your book and we could write about it and review it?" I said, "Sure." So I told the publisher, and they sent them the book. And then about in 2012 or 13, I'm at work and I get a phone call saying, "Hey, Tom," unfortunately, I forgot the guy's name. He goes, "This is," he goes, "You remember me? I was the webmaster from Turner Classic Movies." I said, "Oh yeah, how's it going?" He goes, "Now I'm the VP director of programming, and we're doing a week of beach movies, and we want to use Ben Mankiewicz, and we're going to say like Robert Osborne is on spring break, and we need an expert to sit with Ben. Would you be interested in doing this for a week?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Yeah, I would."
Oh, yeah.
And they were great. I mean, it was only done in one day, but it was they were really, really nice. And Ben Mankiewicz was great.
What was he like?
He was he contacted me separately, and he said, you know, they're sending me all the DVDs to watch these movies because it was all like the Frankie Avalon and F. Funicello Beach movies, and it was like, and the other ones like For Those Who Think Young with Pamela Tiffin, Winter a Go-Go, Beach Ball. And he said, "I'm going to watch them, but I really don't know anything too much about them." He goes, could you submit some questions for me to ask you when we talk about them? So I said, "Okay." And I kind of went through the movies and I sent that, and he's great. He did his homework. He knew, you know, when we sat down to do them. The funny thing about it, funny thing was, in between takes or what setups, the hair and makeup people would come out, and with me, they, you know, did whatever. With him, they touched up his makeup, but they couldn't touch his hair. He took the mirror and he did his own hair, which I thought was funny.
So he was just very particular about how his hair should look.
I guess so. And I had to bring a bunch of change of clothes, and they said bring jeans, bring chinos, and they said if Ben wears jeans, you can't. And so if Ben's not wearing jeans, you can wear a pair of jeans. So they kind of coordinated our wardrobe, you know, so we both weren't sitting there in, you know, jeans. Yeah, it was great. They were really, but the funny part was it was done. They flew me down to Atlanta, where the studio was, and it was with TBS, and there was a lot of stages where they do all the different sports, and their section was like, it was like L shaped, and their section was like on the top of the L, and they said, we're going to show you the studio, and we went all the way down, and it was like at the farthest end, and I said, why is this so far away? And they said, well, we just built this studio for Ben. You'll be the first guest on it, but we don't want Robert Osborne to know because he'll get mad and we're going to have to give him a new set. So they try to keep it secret for as long as they could.
There's a lot of nuances in Hollywood and screening of films and television. There's a lot of stuff you have to abide by.
Yes.
And you got to be careful about it.
Yeah. And they were very, like I said, they actually had a fact checker as we were talking, and I did flub one or two, and I knew I flubbed it. I said, or if we didn't know a date, somebody would yell out. Somebody was like right there looking things up and yelled it out and stuff. So, but first class, they were really sweet people. It was so nice, and everything went so smoothly on that trip.
Not to get too intimate here, but do you get paid for a gig like that?
Yes, I did. Probably more money than they got more money for that than all the royalties I made from the Hollywood Surf and Beach Park.
Oh, did you really? Yeah. Well, that must be a nice take home, huh?
Yes, that was, and they paid the airfare. They paid for my hotel at I think it was the Four Seasons, and I stayed a little longer because my partner came with me. So and I had never been to Atlanta before, so we explored Atlanta for a little bit. But yeah, it was great. They were super nice, and I would definitely do it again. But I don't know if they do it as much now in person, as it looks like they're doing it from home with the screens behind them and stuff.
I did a few galas with some pretty high profile people. I started a Jewish nonprofit organization and ran it for many years. And we would do these highfalutin galas to raise money. We had people like Mia Farrow who would come out, and Bob Geldof and so on. And I would be up on stage. Bob Geldof would be making fun of my hair, call me the Jewish Jimi Hendrix because I had an afro. And then I remember leaving those evenings and going to a coffee shop. Coffee time here in Toronto was late at night. And I would be thinking to myself, man, you guys don't know who I am, I was just so high about being in those environments, hanging out with those guys. Was this a similar feeling you had?
Yes, it was. And actually, believe it or not, when I went back to work, it was a couple of weeks later, and I was crossing the main library, and the main library on 42nd Street. I was going to the restroom, and somebody stopped me and asked me where the bathroom was. And then she looked at me. She goes, "Did I see you on television recently?"
Yeah,
and I was like,
"Yeah, you feel like a bit of a star."
Yeah, I was like, "Oh wow!" I said, "Well, if you watch Turner Classic Movies, you may have." And she goes, "Yes." And I was like, "Oh wow!" Somebody actually recognized me.
Anybody ever asked you for your autograph?
No, but there's a funny story of not. I sometimes would go with my publisher McFarland to these conventions, celebrity conventions, and we were sitting there, and one of the actresses, her name was Quinn O'Hara. She was in my Drive-In Dream Girl book, so she came to meet me in person, and we hung out. So she sat at the table. So some guy comes up to buy the book, and he goes, "So Howard, could you sign it?" So she signed it, and she goes, "Oh, this is Tom, the author. Do you want him to sign it?" She's handing me the book. He's like, "No, that's okay." And he grabs the book. I cracked up. She was furious. She was like, "That's so rude." I thought it was the funniest thing.
You're lucky your mother wasn't there, This it's really fascinating where you've gone with your career, as I said, because I through my interviews with a number of different authors, Dwayne Epstein, Steve Stoller, as I mentioned to you. Dwayne's a lovely guy, and he's written extensively about Hollywood films in the 60s and 70s, very passionate about those times, and claims that those were the best movies that ever happened. I am always very, very curious as to how people find their particular niche in life, what it is about those times, what it is about those actors and actresses that is so compelling to them. And when I interview these individuals, I ask them, and I try to go as deeply as possible about the relationship with them. Um, are you satisfied with the niche that you have established through your books?
Yeah, I am, because I came familiar with movies from the 60s, not so much from the drive-in, but the ABC 430 movie in the 70s when I was a preteen and a teenager, and they would have like Elvis Presley week and Beach Party week, Planet of the Apes week, and that's really how I got into watching. And once I became a fan of Carol Lynley, I started looking for her movies, and I saw The Pleasure Seekers, and I saw a brunette named Pamela Tiffin. So it was from that ABC 430 movie where I got introduced to a lot of the people I actually interviewed. So I never really saw them on the screen in the 60s, but it was the ABC 430 movie that was here in the metropolitan area that I became fans of. So the fact that I sometimes look back thinking, like, when I would watch those movies, and never in my wildest dreams would I ever think that I'd be interviewing half the actresses that were in them and some of the actors. And later with Ryan's Hope, I would thought in a million years, when I was in the 80s, when I was watching Ryan's Hope, that I would do a book on Ryan's Hope and interview a ton of the people who worked on it. So yeah, it is a little satisfying. And for me, the gist was, when during the 70s, I would get film magazines like Film Facts and other movie magazines that were more cultish, but they always talked about the actors and actresses from the horror movies of the 50s, those monster movies and the juvenile delinquent movies. And I wasn't really a fan of those. And I was like, well, why aren't they writing about the actresses from the Elvis Presley movies and the Beach Party movies? Those are the ones. And at that point, I was like, well, nobody's going to do it. I'm going to do it. And then once like I said, when I interviewed Carol Lynley, and then I started interviewing other actresses, I went and I interviewed Quinn O'Hara and Chris Noel and Gail Gerber, all these actresses that were Deanna Lund, all these Beach Party movies and Elvis Presley movies. I interviewed Joan O'Brien, Joan Staley, a whole bunch of them. And so for me, I was like, well, it was also satisfaction to get their stories out. Francine York, she was a great character actress. She worked for years, and when I wrote her a letter, and she called me up and she said, "Is this Tom?" And I said, yes. She goes, "Tom, I've been waiting for that letter for 20 years to tell you my story."
Okay. That's lovely. That's lovely.
So, and she was great, and she was some actresses are really good. Like, she had a story for every single movie and TV show she did. She was on Lost in Space. She was on Batman. She was all over the place. And Jerry Lewis used her a lot of his movies. She had an anecdote for every single thing. Even if it was a small a small part, she would have an anecdote. So she was great.
These are the consummate storytellers, right?
Yes. They
very much so. Tell me, Tom, I watched the Annette Funicello beach films, many of them when I was growing up. Were they good movies?
Depending. Yes, I think they were actually very good. I mean, for what they were, it was like teenage fantasy. It was that whole Southern California myth of, being, hanging out on the beach and surfing and with your girlfriend sitting there on the blanket and stuff. They took them seriously. I mean, and Frankie Avalon and Annette Funicello were like 100% pros. Nobody had a bad thing to say about either one of them. And did they look like California surf? No. I mean, Frankie Avalon was from Italian kid from Philadelphia, and Ed Funicello, I think, was from Utica, New York. But they had that, they projected it, and they surrounded them with actual real surfers and beach girls that they plucked right off the beaches of California, like Sally Soxy and Mary Hughes and Ed Gardner and Mike Nader. They were Mickey Dora. They were and Johnny Fain. They were all real surfers and beach girls, and so they were surrounded by authentic Californians, Southern Californians. So and they were goofy, but they had bouncy songs, and they made a lot of money. I mean, kids flocked to them.
And are any of the movies from that genre considered to be classics?
I think the most is Beach Blanket Bingo. Is probably more so than Beach Party started the whole cycle, but Beach Blanket Bingo, I think, took little pieces from all the different types of things. They had skydiving, mermaids, surfing. I mean, they threw everything in there, and great title song. And, Frankie and Annette, there's Deborah Wally, John Ashley, Bobby Shaw. They're all in there. Buster Keaton. And so Linda Evans is in there. So I think that one is probably the one people consider like the ultimate beach party movie.
I got to let you go here because I know we have a dead stop in a few minutes. I have a lot more questions to ask you. I just want to ask you a real quick one. You can answer it yes or no. You have a propensity, you have an interest in watching those individuals who call secondary actors, let's call them, and I understand that completely. I'll even take it a step further. I actually love watching extras in movies. Do you have that at all?
Oh, yes. A number of the people I did interview, started off sometimes as extras or background. They like the term background, background players. But yeah, I mean, they have interesting stories too. And even just because they observe, if they're a background player, yes, they would sit there and they would tell stories about what they observed happening and stuff.
Yeah.
So, and then a lot of them did progress from background to supporting parts, some to leading roles and stuff. But yeah, I think they're great stories. Christopher Reardon, who I interviewed for my book, Talking Drive-In 60s Cinema. He was a dancer, and and he danced with he was the male dancer that danced the most in all the Elvis Presley movies, and Elvis loved him.
Oh, wow.
And so dancers never got even any credit. I mean, back in those days, dancers got no screen credit. But he has wonderful stories, from working on with Elvis Presley and Margaret and Shelley Fabre and stuff. And he's wonderful. And then he too progressed to supporting, supporting roles in film when he decided to give up the dancing. So that for dancers too, it was hard for them because they didn't want to consider them actors, even though some of them, they gave them lines and stuff. But yeah, Christopher Reardon is a perfect example of wonderful stories. And he was in My Fair Lady, and he did small roles in The Loved One and war movies and Westerns. Great guy. He was really, really friendly guy. And we still in contact on Facebook and stuff.
Very cool.
But yeah.
Tom, I want to thank you very much for doing this interview. I'm really grateful. I enjoyed it very much.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, and I want to wish you Yesha Koach. That's Yiddish, by the way. I know your Yiddish isn't up to par right now, but Yesha Koach means way to go, like way to go on your successes.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's very exciting, and I love the niche that you've established and that you have brought to people like me as readers and many other people, because so many individuals grew up going to the drive-ins, watching those beach movies, having an interest in the Ryan Hopes and the other shows. So thank you for that. We're all very grateful.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad I'm able to share it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for watching and listening, ladies and gentlemen. We look forward to being with you again soon. We have a lot of great shows scheduled all the way up to the end, middle of February, I think. So just be aware. We're going to be talking to some more fascinating individuals who have a lot to share with us, a lot to teach us, and in many ways shows us what it is to be in the zone, to try to find that particular place, perhaps that gift inside of you, and to pursue it as a writer, as an actress, as an actor, as a poet. That's what I like to bring to the show, and to open up your minds. For those of you who are still trying to find your zone, perhaps you can find it here. So until we meet again, sei gesund, go in good health. And once again, I thank you so much for listening and for watching, and to my guest, Tom, for being part of this. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.